This happens to a lot of new woodworkers. You know you need a smoothing plane. So you grab whatever's cheap, like this great neck plane, which honestly is a piece of garbage. So you turn it into a scrub plane. That's totally fine. You need one of those. And then maybe you're out at a yard sale, and you get a good deal on a vintage Stanley. And, you know, everything's there, all the parts and stuff, but boy, the condition is not good. This is going to be a lengthy restoration. Maybe you've never done one before. Maybe you start procrastinating on this project. And while you're sort of screwing around, somebody has a sale. And you pick up one of these new semi-premium planes that are honestly pretty decent. So all of a sudden, you've got a smoothing plane and a scrub plane and then another plane that you're not using. And as you're doing more and more woodwork, you realize, well, I don't need 3 little planes. I need a smoother and a scrub, and then I need a long plane like a jack or a jointer for leveling out surfaces and straightening edges. I need something with a longer sole. I don't need these 3 short planes, but I'm also out of money and I can't buy anything else. Wouldn't it be great if I could take the spare parts from one of these that I'm not using and somehow transform it into a longer plane that I would use? Well, I have good news for you. That's totally possible. It's a good project, and we're going to do it right now. To make our fully adjustable long plane, you just need the metal parts from any decent quality metal plane. I'm using this post-war Stanley No. 4. It's missing parts and it's not collectible, but planes from the late 40s and 50s were very well made, so I know my final plane will work. It's important to use high-quality parts for this project. If you start with a plane that doesn't work well, building it a new body isn't going to fix anything. You can often get good deals on planes with broken bodies or missing handles. We don't need those parts anyway. The main thing is the frog. So unscrew that and save the screws. You might need them for another plane down the road. This little fork back here is going to get in the way. So take that off and throw it in the parts bin too. The adjustment wheel needs to come off temporarily. If it's hard to turn, give it a good shot of oil. Don't force it to turn over dirty threads. Now that we've got our frog stripped down, we need to get rid of this long part that sticks out of the bottom. Get your frog up in a clamp and use this flat bearing surface to guide your hacksaw. Just lay the side of the blade right on there and saw with a slow, controlled stroke. Cast iron is pretty soft, so it's not hard to cut. Even if you're very careful, that bottom surface isn't going to be flat enough. So let's fix that right now. This front edge is a low spot, so I'm going to color it with marker and stay away from it as I file down that high center section. I'm using a big flat file and a controlled push stroke with a bit of a circular motion to keep the surface of the file engaged with the work. If you need to check your progress, the side of your plane blade makes a pretty good straight edge. Filing will take off most of the material, but for a really flat surface, we'll need a better tool. For this project, we're going to be lapping a lot of things flat, and a lapping setup is easy to build. A piece of rubber carpet mat, a chunk of melamine from some throwaway furniture, and a couple pieces of 100 grit sandpaper, and you're ready to go. Now I'm coloring the whole surface. I'm going to lap everything, so when all the marker disappears, I'm done. Press down firmly and take slow, controlled strokes across the paper. I know the middle is high, so I want to see the marker disappear there first. You don't need to get rid of every last bit of marker. If your surface is about 90% flat, that's good enough. Mine is looking good, and I'm only going to lap it a little bit more. While I've got the lapping rig set up, I'm also going to flatten the back of the iron and prepare the edge of the chip breaker. This is all standard plane restoration stuff that I've covered in other videos. I'll link to a couple down in the description. My metal parts are all set, and I'm on to making the wooden body. I'm going to use this sapele. These 2 scraps are the perfect size, and sapele is a very hard and durable wood. Beech and birch are the traditional choices, but hard maple is another good one. You could also use white oak. Just pick something hard and dry. I'm going to dress my pieces perfectly square on all 4 sides. Tool making is more precise than furniture making, and you need to prepare your edges and surfaces very carefully. You also need to pay attention to your wood and make some decisions. My 2 pieces were sawn differently at the mill. This piece is quarter sawn, so the grain is running perpendicular to the surface. Quarter sawn wood is very stable, so after I plane it flat and leave it overnight, it twists a little bit, but not much. My other piece is closer to flat sawn, and the grain is running diagonally. This type of grain is much less stable, and after sitting out for a night, the piece has twisted a lot. Since I've got one quarter sawn piece that's more stable, I'm going to use that as the sole of my plane, where flatness is crucial. My other piece is much more likely to move over time, so I'll use that for the sides, where flatness is much less important. Being glued to the other parts of the body will also help hold this wood steady. It only takes a few minutes to plane the twist back out of both pieces, and I'm on to the next step. I made one of these planes a few years ago, and I had this 1/4-inch elm for the sides just sitting around the shop. That made the project easy. Now, I'm guessing you don't have 1/4-inch pieces of good hardwood just sitting around your shop. So what we're going to need to do is take one of our pieces and resaw it, split it down the middle. Resawing seems really daunting when you're doing it with hand tools, but I've got a bunch of tricks that's going to help it come out right, even on the first shot. I'm going to set my marking gauge to a 1/4-inch plus a little extra to allow for cleanup, and then I'm going to scribe that distance along either side of my piece. Usually, we resaw by running a line down the middle of the board and then trying to saw on that line. For this project, we're going to give ourselves a bigger target by scribing 2 lines and just trying to keep the saw in between them. Any saw wants to follow the path of least resistance. So if I saw a little bit down each corner and then connect the 2 corners across the end of the board, then I'll have a kerf that the saw will follow. When I tilt the board over and start my cut, that kerf keeps the saw right on track, and my cut starts out nice and straight. I'm also sawing down at a shallow angle, which makes it easy to adjust the direction of the saw and keep it between my 2 lines. I'm only about a quarter of the way through, but my cut is right between my lines all the way around the end. When I put the board back in the vise, I flip it around and cut from the other side. Turning the board once in a while cancels out any errors in your sawing. As you get to the end of your cut, the board might pinch your saw, but you can just jam a narrow piece of scrap in the end to keep your saw cutting freely. Once I finish my cut, I've got 2 evenly cut pieces, and the saw marks on the inside aren't bad. I can clean them up quickly. Now I need to fit the frog to my wooden base to make the bed for the iron. I'll use the frog to trace the angle onto the side of my board and carry that line all the way around. I'll cut this angle with a back saw, staying away from my line, and then use a plane to get things level and even. Notice how I've still got the pencil line on the work. In my next step, I'll take away that last little bit of material. I'm using my frog to transfer the screw locations onto the wood, and I've picked a pair of slot head screws with coarse threads. The machine screws from the plane won't work here. You need wood screws, and they shouldn't be too long. I'll drill those holes carefully and then pre-thread the screws. I've got my frog installed just a tiny bit behind the edge of the wood, and I'm going to use my lapping setup to bring that wood into perfect alignment with the frog's surface. A piece of paper protects the surface of the frog for the first few strokes, and when the wood and metal are almost flush, I work the whole face to get a smooth and continuous bed for my plane iron. I have the whole thing colored in with marker, so it's easy to see when I've got everything done. You know, what I love about tool making is the room for creativity. You can shape things however you want. You can fit the tool exactly to your hand. There's so much room for making things custom and doing whatever you want. But the thing about planes is, there's a couple of things that have to be exactly right, or the tool just won't work at all. Once you've got the frog mounted to your wooden base and the surface flushed up, you're at one of those crucial points where things have to be dead on. Before you go any further, you need to make sure that the bed of your plane is perfect. It needs to be exactly square to both sides, both the wood and the metal frog. You need to check it from both sides and hold it up to a bright light. Everything should read square from every direction. You also need to make sure that the whole bed is level and straight. That straight edge should slide right down across the whole surface without hitting anything. You can see a bit of marker on the upper portion of the frog, so I've got a little low spot there, but it's not really a big deal. What matters is the lower portion, where the iron and wood meet, all the way down to the mouth. Oh, and you should install the blade and the lever cap, and make sure everything is working and spaced out correctly. For this hardware, my wood bottom ended up being a little thin, and I needed to add this little riser underneath my frog. With the blade all the way retracted, you should have about 1/8 of an inch of space between the edge and the mouth. That way, you have some room to true up the bottom of the plane without the iron sticking out. When I made this plane a few years ago, I used the exact same thickness bottom that I'm using in this video, and it worked out perfectly. But this time, I'm using different hardware from a different plane, and I need a thicker bottom. You are going to run into different problems as you do this build, especially because I can't predict exactly what kind of plane hardware you're going to have. When you run into a stumbling block, just stop, take a deep breath, and think up a solution. I know you can. Okay, now the hard part is mostly done, and we can do something more fun, like make a comfortable handle. This old gauge jointer plane has a lot of cool features, but one of them is definitely the tote, which is sturdier and more comfortable than a Stanley. It also comes off really easily, and I can trace it right onto a nice piece of cherry. My homemade turning saw is the perfect tool to rough out the shape. It gives you much more control than a coping saw, and you can build it yourself out of scraps. I'll link to the video and the plans down in the description. While I'm shaping the handle, let's talk a little bit about where this project even came from. In the early 1960s, the Marples Company introduced their prefabricated planes, which combined a Stanley-style adjuster with a wooden body laminated together from 4 parts of beech. It was a little like the Stanley transitional planes, except a lot better. Marples made 2 sizes of this plane, a smoother and a jack. These planes were cheaper than all metal planes and more durable. If you dropped one, it probably didn't break. Apparently, they sold pretty well, and may have been popular with manual training schools, filled with young knuckleheads who could break a tool just by looking at it. These planes weren't made for very long, and they're not common now. The only reason I even know about them is that Paul Sellers did a few blog posts on them about 5 years ago. He built one and really liked it. I think he planned to do a video about them, but he never got around to it, and the blog post isn't up anymore. So, am I just copying Paul's copy of the Marples? No, I want to do a lot more than that. The Marples planes came in smoother and jack sizes, like the one I have here. And jack plane's a great size, I use it all the time, but something interesting happened to me recently. I got and started using this gauge jack plane. This is the jack, not the jointer I showed a few minutes ago, and it's really long for a jack plane. Standard jack is about 14 inches long, and this one is 18 inches long, which seems like too much, but when I started using it, I figured out that this length of plane will handle all the normal jack plane stuff and also a lot of triplane or jointer plane tasks. With all this extra length, it's really good at shooting edges and truing up big surfaces, like a tabletop. It's kind of an amazing compromise, and if you just have this and a smoother and a scrub, you can build almost anything. So for our plane, I want to start with the basic jack plane, but then I want to extend it an inch in either direction. And that's going to give us a 16-inch long plane. Now, any plane can usually level out a surface double its length. So if we have a 16-inch long plane, we can easily flatten 32-inch long boards. 32 inches is a great size for tables and desks and a bunch of other furniture we might want to build. It's going to open up a lot of good possibilities for future projects. I've got a number 6 plane here, which conveniently is 14 inches long. That makes it a good model for designing the sides of my plane. I'm going to trace most of the curves onto my thin stock and then freehand in the rest of the details. Obviously, you don't have a number 6 plane to copy, or you wouldn't be doing this project. So I'm going to include a printable template in the plans. You can glue it to your wood and just cut the shape out and finish it with a spoke shave and some sandpaper. I've got my 2 side pieces stuck together so the work goes faster, and they both come out exactly the same. I know making handles is tricky too, so I've got a printable template for my tote. I've streamlined the gauge design and adjusted the height to make it fit under the hardware. These templates are both in the plans, and you can find those down in the description. The last piece I need is a big block of wood to make the front of the plane. I've got a chunk of walnut here, and I'm scribing on a 60-degree angle to make the escapement. That's the same angle you find on a traditional wooden plane, and it lets the chips come out easily. I carry the line around the piece, make the cut, and clean up with a finely set smoothing plane. Now it's time for the final fit-up. I've got my completed tote, and I'm using a 3/4 inch chisel to lay out a tenon on the underside. This is an old plane maker's trick. Instead of just mortising the handle directly into the base, you make a smaller tenon underneath. That way, if your mortise is a little bit ragged, it's hidden underneath the handle, and you get a clean look, even if your technique is less than perfect. Transfer your tenon shape directly to the plane base and mortise it out with that same 3/4 inch chisel. These are still the cheap chisels from a couple weeks ago, and I haven't sharpened them since that video, so they seem totally decent. I'll link to that review down below. Now we're ready for the glue up, which isn't too difficult. Start with the tote. If you have a good fit, you shouldn't need any clamps, and you only need to let it dry for a few minutes before you move on. I'm doing the final glue up on a really flat surface to help me get a flat bottom on my plane. I only need to put glue on the sides, and I'm tracing the shape of the other parts so I know exactly where to put the glue. I'm using a thin layer of glue and brushing it evenly around. Squeeze out is hard to clean up on projects like this, so you want to use the minimum amount of glue. Put on as many clamps as you need to. You just want even pressure all around. You can also use some wooden clamping blocks to spread out the pressure. I should have done that, but I didn't think of it. I've made a couple of these planes now, and the bottoms usually look a little uneven when they come out of the clamps. Don't worry if things don't look perfectly flat. We've left ourselves some margin for truing up that sole. We also need to trim either end and do a little bit of detailing. I'm using my Rubo winding sticks without the feet to check the sole. I've got a bit of twist, and that happens with this project. I'll plane the twist out and then just flatten the whole thing. As you're working here, be sensitive to the feedback you get from the plane. You'll be able to feel a lot of those high spots as you're working. And just like a metal plane, we can use our lapping rig to make that bottom really perfect. Pencil marks will tell you where you have low spots, and you'll need the blade installed for proper tension. Use a steady, even stroke, going in different directions. That should give you the flattest final surface. Man, that was a big project. So, does the final tool, work? It really does. These are the first shavings this plane is taking. I didn't do any additional fiddling off camera. Once the sole is flat, the plane is great for jointing edges. The wood sole glides smoothly, and the controls work just like they do in a metal plane. I can really feel the extra length riding over the high spots and giving me a true edge. It's also great for flattening surfaces. This piece of yellow pine is just construction lumber, so it's far from flat. But I only have to work it for a few minutes to get a flat surface that's also smooth and shimmery. This tool works great. Of course, we also want it to look good, so I gave it a final finish of boiled linseed oil. That's going to protect and lubricate the wood while still letting it breathe and adjust to humidity changes. This is a wooden tool, so you should expect to retrue it once in a while. That's normal. This is usually the part of the video where I say, hey, don't worry about doing this project. I'm sure it'll be great. It's easy. Well, honestly, making a plane like this is not easy. It's a challenging project. And it's something that you probably want to do if you have a little bit of experience doing other woodworking projects. But if you do this and you do it successfully, you will end up with a great, very useful tool that costs not a lot of money, a lot less than buying something like this. The biggest struggle here is probably tuning the plane after it comes out of the clamps. You might think it's flat and then it still doesn't cut very well or doesn't adjust the way you want it to. And that's where you really have to be detail-oriented. Look at every different part of the plane. Make sure things are square. Make sure they're even. An inexpensive little machinist square like this one can be perfect for that final tuning. You might have to do that slowly. Do a little bit, put it down and walk away. Come back and look at it later with fresh eyes. Little tricks like that can make it a lot easier to get a good result. Now, this is a pretty long video, but I still couldn't cover everything, like how to figure out the mouth opening and the width of this bottom piece. There are just too many details. And that's why I've got a good, detailed set of plans that include printable templates for these side pieces and for this custom tote shape that I made. So it'll be easy for you to make these. I always keep my plans as affordable as possible, and they are linked down in the description. And I also want to say this is my first video of 2021. And honestly, I am super excited. I have all kinds of new plans for the upcoming year. I know a lot of creators say that, but I actually mean it. I'm going to do a bunch of new stuff. And I wouldn't be able to do any new stuff if it weren't for my patrons on Patreon. They provide the support that allows all of this stuff to happen. And in return, they get early access to my videos, they get all of my plans for free. They got this plan for free this morning. They get access to the best woodworking discussion forum on the net. It's a lot. And if you're interested in becoming one of the people that's part of this great community, go on over to patreon.com/RexKruger and check out all the rewards and extras I have for the people who support this content. I'll be back next week with a really exciting project. I have a great collaboration with a surprise guest. So make sure you hit that bell icon down below so you don't miss a video. And hey, Happy New Year. Thanks for watching.